Iranians, by and large, have come to the realization and conclusion that the regime has no legitimacy. Ideologically, it has failed. Economically, it has failed. Socially, it has failed. And most critically, having slaughtered upwards of tens of thousands of innocent Iranians.
There is also a fear that if regime survive this conflict, it will sprint toward a nuclear deterrent as their ultimate shield.
I fear that Washington may be capitalizing or investing too much and not really recognizing fully the nature of Shia ideology. They're not in it to chicken out. They are in it to the end.
How do you convince a royalist, a Republican, and a leftist to sit at the same table when they have 47 years of trauma and disagreement between them?
It's a game of deliverables as well as a game of leverage. While the U.S. has the bomb and the collective of sanctions as its leverage, the Islamic Republic of Iran has its control of the Strait of Hormuz today, as well as its threat of the nuclear program.
Israel and Iran were once natural allies, and you have spoken about the fraternal bond between Persians and Jews. If the regime falls tomorrow, how quickly can that Cyrus the Great era friendship be restored?
We recognize that the failure of the opposition to work together, come together, coalesce, is partly to be at fault and blamed for the paralysis and the disaster brought to our homeland today.
Welcome back. Today we are standing at the edge of history. For 47 years, the world has looked at Iran through the lens of crisis. Today we look at it through the lens of a conclusion. Our guest today is a man who has lived in the room where it happens for decades. He is a veteran of strategic communications, a former chief of staff to the Crown Prince of Iran, and currently the director of the Iran Freedom Project. He is the son of an OPEC hostage, a bridge between East and West, and the strategic mind behind a vision for a pluralistic Iran. Mehrdad Marty Youssefiani, welcome to Beyond the Summit.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Mehrdad, you have spent over 30 years at the intersection of high-stakes lobbying and geopolitical risk. But your story started long before that, with your father's survival of the 1975 OPEC siege. How did growing up in the shadow of that kind of political violence shape your personal North Star?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's an interesting question. I mean, we all have our individual stories and narratives in life. Mine is nothing different from a different Iranian living at various intervals of time. I am a son of an oil executive, a diplomat, born in Tehran, raised in Tokyo, Japan. And so I am, like everybody else, a collective of my personal experience. So that your reference to my father having been taken hostage in 75 by Carlos at OPEC obviously influenced me at the time, but I don't know if the Iranian Revolution itself wasn't even more impactful, or what we're going through today, and war and bombs falling at the homeland. We are a generation of traumatized Iranians. This trauma has been caused most distinctly after 78 for us collectively. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I appreciate sharing that. Thank you so much. So you were the chief of staff to the Crown Prince for 15 years. You have seen the Iranian opposition at its strongest and its most fragmented. Looking back, what was the specific aha moment that convinced you that your life's work had to be the liberation of Iran?
Yeah, well, titles are not really relevant, chief of staff or chief strategic counselor or whatnot. But yes, for many, many years, I served at the side of Prince Reza Pahlavi. And prior to that, I had known him socially. And my profession in Washington, having been political campaign management, I used to be partners with GOP legendary strategist Ed Rollins. And so that was what I was practicing. I was a practitioner of strategic communications and election campaigning. And so at one point, I think it was approaching maybe 99 or 2000, where it made sense. Iran was just going through its transformation. I think we all recognize that Iran needed to have its trial and errors, various promises of reform failing, the regime's double talk constantly offering the world one visage and practicing. So that all needed to have its trial and error. Around 2000, it became clear that it may be the right time to step in and see what can be done. So that was really the initial phase of trying to step in and see what can be done, especially in terms of engaging. Technology was just being influenced by communication at the time. Phones and texts and so forth was just starting to come. Direct internet communication was just starting to develop. And of course, today we are beyond that. So here we are, net result of at least 25, 30 years of working at it.
Yeah, I love it. So let's focus on present moment. We are currently in a fragile 2-week ceasefire. From your perspective, is this a genuine diplomatic opening, or it is merely the regime's survival reflex to avoid total institutional collapse after the strikes in March?
Yeah, I think this is the $1 million question the world is contemplating because of the history, the 47-year history of the Islamic Republic. I don't have much confidence in their sincerity, their capacity to actually deliver. We've seen for 4 decades a variety of interest groups and rivalries within the Iranian regime, disallowing, irrespective of which group is leading at which point. We've always seen that the other groups, either jointly or separately, undermine what's happening. So if the face of this dialogue with currently being discussed in Pakistan is Mr. Ghalibaf, I'm not sure if his rivals will allow him to actually deliver what Washington desires. And at the same time, I think it's a game of deliverables as well as a game of leverage. While the U.S. has the bomb and the collective of sanctions as its leverage, the bomb meaning the tool of war, and the collective of sanctions as the Washington leverage. The Islamic Republic of Iran has its control of the Strait of Hormuz today, as well as its threat of the nuclear program that it's had, and most especially its leverage over its proxy groups throughout the regime. So I think it's a battle of leverages and which one ends up chickening out. I fear that Washington may be capitalizing or investing too much and not really recognizing fully the nature of Shia ideology. They're not in it to chicken out. They are in it to the end. This they see as existential for them. And let's not forget, Shia ideology has traditionally glorified martyrdom. So the cost of life for this regime is not important. And that is something that I do not know if Washington, in fact, embraces properly.
You mentioned some great points. You mentioned main objectives of this war, so enrich uranium, highly enrich uranium, so control of Strait of Hormuz and proxies and missile programs. So their main objectives, the mission, I believe, is still not accomplished, looking that way. And also you mentioned rivalry between factions inside the country. And also I believe it's the matter of legitimacy. You have said the regime has lost its legitimacy. Here we talk about failed experiments. Why do you believe the Islamic Republic is no longer a state in a traditional sense, but rather a parasite on the Iranian civilization?
We've seen, I think we have, as Iranians, whether it be Iranian Americans or Iranian Europeans, wherever the diaspora is from the outside, and specifically Iranians, the 92 million today living inside, extract the base of the regime, whether that is 10 or 15% plus or minus. I think Iranians, by and large, have come to the realization and conclusion that the regime has no legitimacy. Ideologically, it has failed. Economically, it has failed. Socially, it has failed. And most critically, having slaughtered upwards of tens of thousands of innocent Iranians, I think that was the final straw, if you will, that broke the regime's legitimacy back. And it has
Absolutely.
really nothing to stand on. So the issue of regime's legitimacy is one of three areas that I think will define the moment supreme or the moment where the regime will in fact collapse. The first and foremost is what we just described, a regime losing its credibility. The Islamic Republic today, I think in the eyes of the Iranian people, most importantly, and now in the eyes of the world, has lost legitimacy. Number two, the Iranian people, those living inside, need to find the confidence that those guns, those suppressive forces that killed our young men and women just a couple of months ago is starting to unravel. And so the confidence to, if you will, take to the streets, they need to see that. Otherwise, they just revert to what just happened a couple of months ago. Number three, they need to see a viable, reliable, tangible alternative to the current regime. And that is the biggest challenge that we have, because I think the first two conditions we are meeting, legitimacy is gone. Hopefully we will see more defections. But I think the defections are also largely tied to the third category, and that is a viable alternative. I think
Right.
if there were to be a legitimate, tangible, verifiable, convincing alternative, an opposition that can actually take charge and ride that horse, I think that'll also accelerate the defection within the Islamic Republic's suppressive forces and enable the Iranian people to achieve and meet and deliver that moment supreme that the world is holding its breath.
Yeah, absolutely. So I cannot put more emphasis on the point that you just mentioned. It's a very critical point because people in Iran need to defect from Islamic Republic, but there has to be a viable option to defect to. Yeah, this is very important. It is heartbreaking to see the executions haven't stopped, even during this war. Why does a regime that claims to be defending its border against foreign enemies spend so much energy killing its own people in the streets, even during the war?
Let's not forget, it all goes back again to the ideology of this regime. Ideologies we have learned cannot be bombed away. Ideologies cannot be negotiated away. Ideologies are deeply embedded in philosophies and political ideals of a regime, of a system. Today, what we have is a regime fighting for its survival. It is not fighting to win. It is fighting to survive. But let me take you back not just too far ago, because I think it's an exemplary demonstration of how far this regime is willing to go. And that is what this regime, under the command of the Revolutionary Guards, the Sepah, as we call them, for about a decade, it sustained Bashar Assad in Syria when Bashar Assad was at the moment of collapse. If it wasn't for the Islamic Republic of Iran's Sepah going in there and actually slaughtering hundreds of thousands of Syrians, I think the numbers are in excess of 400, 500, 600,000 Syrians were slaughtered from barrel bombs to phosphate bombs to, we learned at some point, the famous red line was a use of chemical warfare against a civilian. That exercise was primarily directed, designed, and executed by the Islamic Republic of Iran, Sepah. It is the same people that will not hesitate to do the same domestically. And so there is the irrationality that the world does not recognize, because the Islamic Republic has its own rationale when it comes to politics and governance.
Right.
It is not compatible with that of the West. And therein lies the challenge between when we learn that Vice President Vance may be leading in negotiations with Mr. Ghalibaf. I fear the rationality of the Islamist regime that comes to the table, if not well understood by the vice president and his counselors. I fear that it'll be like two ships passing each other in the dark of night, not recognizing where each is going, and this opportunity be squandered again.
Yeah, wonderful analogy. Yeah, absolutely. There is also a fear that if the regime survive this conflict, they will sprint toward a nuclear deterrent as their ultimate shield. Do you believe that West has finally realized that a nuclear deal is impossible with an entity that doesn't recognize the right for its own people to exist?
I think that's a valid point of observation. I think it's perfectly legitimate to draw that conclusion that, in fact, this war, this round that has just been paused, I think any regime put it in its shoes would probably deduce that it is compelled to take that final step, because at the end of the day, they recognize that they do not have the matching power of your traditional, conventional warfare and technology. It cannot match that. It cannot match that of Israel's. In fact, militarily, in terms of technology, it may not match any of the important Persian Gulf Arab states. So I would imagine that they would deduce that they would need to take that final step. And therein lies the challenge, because we have now seen this game, this play played before, where action is taken, conclusion is being left open-ended, leaving the regime deeply wounded, and then it will rely on whatever extreme measures that it will desire, whether it be taking on the Iranian streets with the militancy that it has shown in terms of the iron fist that it has shown, or taking on the region and the world in terms of demonstrating that it has, in fact, taken the final step towards that ultimate weapon, the nuclear bomb.
Right. So you just mentioned a viable alternative. Let's talk about the united transition. You have been a vocal advocate for pluralism. How do you convince a royalist, a Republican, and a leftist to sit at the same table when they have 47 years of trauma and disagreement between them?
Well, yes, we all know the challenges there, and exiled politics are universally messy. As one who has embraced a form of constitutional monarchy as what I view relevant, historically speaking, as a solution for Iran, the symbolism, but that is only the form of construct we're talking about. Fundamentally, the Iranian people, I believe, have come to the conclusion that they are committed to a elective democratic system of governance. Now, whether at top is a constitutional monarch or at the top is a president in form of a republic, that is what I believe Prince Reza Pahlavi has always suggested is the distinction he's looking for, though he may be a candidate for one form of that construct. So if that is the approach, we have a fundamental, deep understanding in at least 90% of what the Iranian people desire. That is an elective, representative, democratic government. Now, we also need to look at Iran. Iran today is not that of 1978. Back then, it was 40 million people. Now we're 92. Combined with those in exile, we're a nation of 100 million, with a variety of ideologies and political beliefs. Yes, the constitutional monarchists in Iran have an important standing. Under a theocracy that we have, it is impossible to gauge that, so we don't know what that percentage is. Is it 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40%? We don't know. But whatever that is, we have to assume that at least an equal percentage will be those who desire a republic. And then add to that dynamic, we have the Iranian ethnicities, which in turn have a variety of ideologies within themselves, which combined constitute 50% of the Iranian population. So when you look at the dynamics of the Iranian polity, the Iranian political universe, it is not monolithic. It is in fact colorful. I like to explain to some of my friends and neighbors that look at the Persian carpet. Wonderful texture, wonderful design, brilliant colors, but collectively is what the beauty of the Persian carpet is, that collective visage, if you will. So the Iranian community right now today is that. No single color, no single shape can claim that it represents a vast supermajority of all. And thus, having lived in a pluralistic societies ourselves, me in the United States, our friends in Europe, those elsewhere, we see that the only way the best democracies in Europe have been able to deliver good governance has been through coalitions representing everybody. And so that is what a solution that we are looking at, for a collective to come together, whomever is the face of this universal effort for Iran, doesn't matter, but whomever that individual is, it can be Reza Pahlavi for those who believe he is the strongest face out there. It would always, in my view, be him plus, him supplemented with everybody else representing all other ideologies, to take the Iranian nation on the day after the collapse of this regime singularly offers a danger of all those who feel excluded uniting against the center. So I think the collective is much stronger than the singular.
I love that. That being said, we all know that we need the bureaucracy, so the institutions, the middle level administrators within Iran to stay, having the experience of Iraq and so many other countries, what happened, so when they were dismissed. How do we signal to the average government worker in Iran that regime change isn't a threat to their family's safety, but an invitation to a functional life?
That's mission critical. I think everybody recognizes that, having learned from the history of our neighbors, both to our east and to our west, Afghanistan and Iraq, and of course, further out, Syria and Libya and so forth. It's critical. Remnants of the former cannot be expunged. We even experienced that in 1978. Key technocrats and bureaucrats of the previous era, the Pahlavi dynasty, remain behind. Now, eventually, over time, many of them were cleansed. Paksazi was the word that they used at the time, but it's critical today. Why? Because the Islamist regime in Iran has managed to orchestrate a massive bureaucracy which numbers in the millions, 3, 4, 5 million. I think it's at least 3 million directly and multiple of that indirectly by bureaucracies and organizations that feed into the governmental machinery. So that is a monstrous number of human capital that cannot be excluded. Now, having said that, of course, it's important to make a distinction. Those at the upper echelon whose hands are either bloodied or, if you will, sticky in terms of corruption, those people will find an exit appropriate to whatever crimes they may have committed, but it's the body that needs to be maintained. This is where narrative and putting one's money where one's mouth is, the expression used here, is critical. If we advocate the integration of the rank and file of this current bureaucracy, the narrative cannot be based on a discourse that invites vengeance, that invites violence, and promises getting equal, getting even. Some of the discourse out there on social media today trouble me and many others, because what we want to message into those who we desire to peel away from that regime are being threatened by promises of getting even and vengeance. And that is a catastrophe, because it will not accelerate defection. In fact, it will push those who we want to defect back into the arms of the regime, because they do not know where they stand. And those who promise to come with a vengeance will be chasing them, so they will run away.
Yeah, absolutely. Practice what you preach, freedom and democracy, 100%. So, the Iran Freedom Congress held a summit in London recently. What was the signal sent from that meeting to the IRGC commanders who are currently questioning their loyalty to a dying supreme leader?
Well, a dead supreme leader and an absent one at that. So in terms of what signal it sent to the IRGC is, I think, less consequential and important exactly at this time, as opposed to the signal it desired to send to the Iranian people, to the opposition at large, whether it be domestically or in exile. And third, the signal it seeks to send to the powers that be who are determining the future of Iran. The signal was very simple. What we discussed earlier, that the Iranian society is not a monolith. We recognize that, number one. Number two, we recognize that the failure of the opposition to work together, come together, coalesce, is partly to be at fault and blamed for the paralysis and the disaster brought to our homeland today. And so this is a recognition in point of time that enough is enough. We have failed collectively, inside and outside, to work together. And so this was a step towards making that pluralism into a cohesive unit, make it happen. So that was number two. And number three, it was also to show to the world outside that, yes, it can be done. It has been messy, much like elsewhere, but we are coming together, especially that this exercise, this experiment called Iran Freedom Congress, is actually the collection of real, tangible names and faces who can move needles inside Iran. Perhaps not necessarily in Los Angeles and Toronto and Munich. Maybe not. Maybe so. I can't be sure. But for sure, these are people who have and are able to move the needle inside Iran. Solid, long-standing ethnic leaders representing collectively 50% of the Iranian nation. Solid people who were formerly members of the regime, who have abandoned it, who have defected it, and who have called repeatedly for regime change, people who are currently in prison, people who are currently under house arrest, those kinds of people who have a variety of alliances and linkage and perhaps loyalties within the breaking up regime. So people who have actually a game on the ground, including important union leaders, important teacher and civil society organizational leaders, and so forth. So it brought that collection together, hoping that it can be able to leave a spirit of open door and an extension of the hand to everybody else to come together to forge an alliance to save our homeland.
Yeah, I love that. Let's be hopeful for that hope. If you agree, let's talk about the region. The GCC countries have been caught in the crossfire Do you view them as passive participants or victims for the Islamic Republic's regional extortion?
I think there's no question that the region has for 47 years been very, very apprehensive, has repeatedly, cyclically seen variations of militancy issued by the Islamic Republic. The earlier years in the 80s, we saw how it took on the House of Saud, and irrespective of the various interval thereafter, today we see, though under the guise of military bases in their territories, it is no denying that the Islamic Republic has been targeting those societies and civil targets as targets for their various drones and missiles. So, victim of the Islamic Republic's overreach is not something that can be denied.
Right. Another key player is Turkey. Turkey's involvement is often a wild card. In your strategic view, is Ankara a partner in a stable post-Mullah Iran, or do you fear a democratic Iran would challenge their regional hegemony?
Well, I mean, yes, that's an issue that, ancient lands and civilizations have to put into the big picture perspective. Our region dates millennia. The Persian Empire, which reached out to the entire region and beyond, has influenced much of the ideology and sort of, if you win, vision of grandeur for many nation states that have survived various eras. One challenge with Turkey, not knowing exactly where it will finally end up, is the sort of indications of the emergence of pan-Turkism. And that can be viewed in troubling terms because, as we know, the region from the Persian plateau given to some of the former Soviet states, there is an extension of territory and nations who any such pan-Turkism may sort of have a reach and ambition for. So that can be a challenging viewpoint if Ankara, in fact, embraces that. The current leader of Turkey, Erdogan, has toyed with a combination of Turkic Sunni Islam / pan Turkism. So that is an issue. That is a challenge that I worry about. And though we don't have a conclusive definition of where it's going, that is something that I think everybody is looking at with careful lens.
Talking about Israel. Israel and Iran were once natural allies, and you have spoken about the fraternal bond between Persians and Jews. If the regime falls tomorrow, how quickly can that Cyrus the Great era friendship be restored?
Yeah, it's important to double down and emphasize it's beyond fraternal. I think the fraternal bond applies to our neighbors within the region. The Arab states of the Persian Gulf are neighbors to their east, west, north, and south, but ours is a civilizational bond. The Persian and the Judaic civilizations have a bond that goes at least 3 or 4 millennia. That is undeniable. It's one of the longest standing, deeply intertwined relationships in the world. Let's not forget. And I emphasize this point to many of my friends, Americans and Europeans, who necessarily do not see it as how it is. And that is, Iranians of Jewish faith is what the definition is in Iran, as opposed to Jews in Iran. So, and why do I say that? Because unlike many societies today, for example, Latin America or Europe or Asia or Africa, where because of circumstances, Jews have had to migrate and move around, the Jews in Iran have been there for at least 3,000 years, at least 1,000 years before the birth of Islam. So, and the Jews throughout the Persian history have contributed enormously, undeniably, to our art, music, science, medicine. The Jews, the Persian Jews, or Persians who happen to practice the faith of Judaism, have throughout our history played important roles as counselors and members of a variety of royal courts. So none of these are deniable. And that is why I believe, irrespective of what has transpired for the past 47 years, it is natural, it is intuitive, it is civilizational bond that will return. Now, I want to bring a caveat here as well. I do worry that some of the narrative and some of the war management today may pose a risk in harming or bruising or gently challenging that alliance. That's where I would counsel our Israeli friends to be careful. Infrastructure targeting, careless targeting whereby innocent civilians, those are issues that the regime will use to sort of define the Israeli relationship. And that's where Israel needs to be smart and communicate and ensure that the military targeting is not confused with a civilizational challenge between our two people.
Absolutely. Mehrdad, you live in the West, but your heart is clearly in Iran. When you close your eyes and think of free Iran, what is the first image that comes to your mind?
Well, I think all of us born in Iran, especially a child of the pre 1978, it has always pained me to see and always ask this question that we all do: what would have come? What would have been? Where would have we been? Where would have Iran been had we not had this catastrophic reroute brought by the Islamic Republic? So the first thing that comes to my heart is a warm joy that at least we may find a chance to get back on track and hopefully catch up and hopefully regain the direction that Iran was pursuing back then. No, things were not perfect, but for sure, Iran was modernizing. For sure, Iran was heading to a bright future. As an American of Iranian heritage, having been given refuge by America, having been given opportunities here, having been, in fact, a practitioner of politics and electioneering here in America, I can only hope that it is experiences such as that, whether it be mine or those in Silicon Valley or those in the sciences, the arts, the academe and industry, I can only hope that we can help transfer some of our experiences. So while being torn that my homeland of birth is being militarily challenged by the homeland that gave me refuge, I can only hope that some conclusion can come about whereby at least 92 million people inside Iran can find the freedom they deserve so that they can build on their own, with our help, the future that is the destiny of the Iranian people.
I appreciate that. I want to close on a personal note. We have covered the war, the politics, and the philosophy. After everything you've seen, lost, and fought for, what does freedom mean to you personally?
The freedom I've had here in America and having traveled the world, is clearly denied of my peers who live in Iran, who just for the right of choosing how to clothe themselves or just to have the right to exercise their different political view is met by bullets, chains, and slaughter. That is unfathomable to me because sadly or fortuitously, which one it is, I don't know, I have not experienced that. Most people in the world, at least in the free world, have not experienced that. to know that you can go out and be shot for just the way you look, just the way you talk, just the way you think, just the way you dream is incomprehensible. So freedom is, I think, all of that combined for a person to be able to wake up in the morning and learn that the day can come to an end without a loss of life just because the way they are.
Mehrdad, thank you for your unwavering service to the idea of free Iran.
Thank you so much.